80% of these things after investigation can be explained as misidentifications. In 15% of cases there's probably insufficient information to be sure. 5%, very interesting. And into that 5% go sort of cases where UFOs have been seen by commercial airline pilots, by military personnel, sometimes by RAF pilots, cases where these things have been tracked on civil and sometimes military radar, performing extraordinary speeds and manoeuvres.
Definitely, the majority of all UFO reports can be explained in conventional terms. You know, we forget that the acronym UFO stands for Unidentified Flying Object, and unfortunately, it's become synonymous with alien spaceship. But of the unexplained cases, of which there are hundreds of thousands, there have been millions of UFO reports, we know that, worldwide. There are hundreds of thousands which are unexplained, and the best ones for me, the ones I find the most convincing, are from qualified observers such as astronauts, military and civilian pilots, air traffic controllers, because we forget that many UFO reports have been corroborated by radar, and even if the pilots and air traffic controllers have been drinking, radar sets normally are abstemious in that respect.
I can't rule out the idea of extraterrestrial visitation. I'd had no interest in the subject, certainly no belief, so I went in there really not knowing what to expect. But I must admit that some of the things that I saw, both in terms of the old files, the ones that are now being released, and of course the day-to-day business of the investigations on the new cases as they came in, that convinced me that by the end of that tour of duty, I thought, well, I still don't know what UFOs are, but there is more to this than just misidentifications of aircraft lights and weather balloons, even though by volume that accounts for most of it.
Well, I was sent this extraordinary book, The Flying Saucers Are Real, by Major Donald Kehoe. It was sent to me by a cousin in America who knew of my passion for aviation and space travel for as long as I can remember. I think there's something in my mother's baby book to the effect that at the age of a few months old, Timothy seems unnaturally fascinated by all manner of flying objects. But I've always been mad about aircraft and space travel, so it was a natural progression. And especially when I read that it was pilots and, as I say, both military and civilian and air traffic controllers were confirming these things, so that really clinched it for me.
I've never seen a UFO, let alone anything more exotic in an Air Force hangar.
No spooky experiences at all?
No, not really, but in a sense I think that kind of gives me an advantage, because it means that as somebody who used to have this as a job for the government, as somebody who now commentates on it in the media and writes about it for the newspapers, for example, I can do so in a fairly dispassionate way, and I can sort of say, look, I'm not some believer trying to ram a view down people's throats, but this was my job, I did this for the government, this is what I know.
Well, I've selected from my book what for me is one of the most compelling images of an unknown flying craft that I've ever seen. It was taken in 1963 by an Avenza Airlines, that's Venezuelan Airlines pilot, sitting in the right-hand seat as the first officer. He took it through the window with his camera, showing a craft, its shadow on the jungle beneath, and the aircraft shadow is also quite clearly visible, that of a DC-4, and you can see part of the engine, what's called the spinner, of this four-engined airliner. And the photograph has been analyzed by professional topographers and mathematicians, despite the fact it was debunked almost as soon as it had appeared by all sorts of people who were either ignorant or were professional debunkers. And I've made my own tests on it using an actual model of a craft and an airliner. This picture was taken in 1951 in California with a camera which was mounted on a plate, on a telescope. It could only be used in conjunction with a telescope.
Okay.
So very, very difficult to fake. And it shows a craft which is estimated to be anything from 1,500 feet in length, and some smaller craft which were seen to leave it, which appear to be surrounded by some kind of corona, which many physicists believe is a corona of plasma associated with the propulsion system of some of these objects.
On May 2008, the chief astronomer from the Vatican said that the existence of extraterrestrials actually didn't contradict church teaching. And then on the 23rd of July, we had Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon, actually saying that there had been a cover-up, that he had been briefed, and that Roswell really did happen.
This is really turning into be what I've called summer of the saucers. You've mentioned in your intro there a couple of the things that have happened, these extraordinary statements that we've had, but there's been much more. In May this year, the Ministry of Defence, where I worked for 21 years, started what's going to be a 3 to 4 year process to release its entire archive. The Vatican statement that you mentioned happened within about 2 days of that.
Roswell, I mean, that's a massive topic that everybody always wants to talk about.
Yes.
What are your feelings on that?
Well, it definitely happened. There's dispute about some of the sites where the craft crashed. Some people say there was more than one craft, too. My own information from my own clandestine sources is that at least one craft was actually shot down by the United States Army Air Forces.
Okay.
And it took several days before it came down. And according to this particular source who gave me this information, who I've actually named in the book, he's a former state representative for New Mexico and a former aerospace engineer, he said a colleague of his actually saw one of these recovered craft, and he could see the entry holes for the particular caliber of ammunition that would have been used to bring this craft down. And this led to an extraordinary conflict, if I can only describe it as that, because not just in the United States, but all over the world, following that incident, the UFOs, or some of them, began to attack our aircraft. And many, even airliners, not just military planes, but many airliners were lost during this conflict situation. And I believe it's a conflict situation which continues to this day to some extent. That's not to say they're all hostile by any means. The Aztec case in 1948, which was actually far more impressive than the Roswell case, in my opinion. A craft about 100 feet in diameter was recovered by military intelligence and scientific intelligence specialists, and I've been to the actual crash site where this thing came down, practically all in one piece, and the Americans acquired a tremendous amount of technological information from that craft. It was in March of 1948, and many witnesses, actually there have been sort of deathbed confessions, which have been reported and witnessed by Scott Ramsey and his wife Suzanne, who are planning a book on this case. And I've done a chapter about it in Need to Know. and many scientists were involved. They eventually managed to get into this craft through a hole in one of the portholes. Again, this implies to me that it was perhaps shot down, and there were, I think, quite a number of small alien bodies which were charred. They were all deceased, and they all had apparently died as a result of exposure to the atmosphere, which had obviously got in through one of the cabins.
But you've also said that you believe that there are aliens living among us.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think...
So how come some of them are dying and some of them are absolutely fine?
Because there are different levels of evolution. My information is that this is nothing new about aliens, and, you know, the Hindu Vedas, the Brahmin records, the Bible talks about extraordinary beings coming out of the sky in flying machines, and I know they're often referred to as angels in the Bible, for example, but they're usually described as having the appearance of a man. And that's a quote from one of the Old Testament reports.
Well, yeah, the book of Genesis is kind of full of Elohim and
Absolutely.
the sons of God saw peoples of the skies coming down. And
that's a very good quote, actually. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair and came in unto them. You can't get more graphic than that. And I think that is a very early reference to hybridization. I think we are a hybridized species. I think some of these beings have been on planet Earth for much longer than we have, and we were colonized. Edgar Mitchell, I know, and I've discussed his opinions about the subject, and as many of you out there will know, about 5 or 6 weeks ago he was reported in the national media that, you know, there's been a massive cover-up since the 1940s, and that contact has been established.
But I mean, actually, he's been saying this for years, but this was the first time he said it quite so pointedly.
Yes.
But yes, I mean,
correct, you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
He's even emphasized, you know, I've been saying this for years, but suddenly it's picked up and it becomes a news item.
So how long have you known Dr. Edgar Mitchell?
I've met him once. I've corresponded with him over, I would say, about 6 or 7 years.
Okay. And your opinion of him is that...
He's absolutely, totally reliable, in my opinion, and a very brave man to come forward. It's very interesting. In Need to Know, I have the report from Buzz Aldrin that Apollo 11 was actually paced on the way to the moon in July of 1969. And he's since sort of changed his statement to a certain extent, but he made it on a British television documentary, and it was supported by Dr. David Baker, Apollo 11 senior scientist, that there was a craft which was beside the vehicle, Apollo 11. It was bell-shaped when looked at through the monocular, through the cabin windows, and all the crew members saw it.